Hello! In this tutorial, we're going to be covering the basics in getting started with embroidery. I'm going to show you how to thread a needle, tie a knot, use an embroidery hoop, and also how to start a stitch and tie in a knot to finish a stitch. We're going to be learning these concepts with our Jack Dempsey Needle Art Quilt Block. Let's go ahead and get started. Your embroidery will be done with embroidery floss. You can see an example. This is how it comes in a skein like this. And you'll see one end here, and you're going to pull it out to get a length that we're going to be sewing with. They recommend that you cut it in 1 yard lengths. If that's too long for you, you can definitely do it shorter than that, but I definitely wouldn't do it any longer than 1 yard, because if your floss is too long, it's actually going to get tangled very easily and it could cause a lot of knots. If you look closely at your floss, you're going to see that it's made up of individual strands. So we're actually going to separate these because when we're sewing, we only need 3 strands and each floss has 6 strands in there. So we're going to actually split it in half, and I'm going to show you the easy way to do this. Definitely don't separate them until you cut your lengths. I find that if I attempt to just grab 3 strands and start pulling this apart, it may seem like it's going to work and that's going to be the fastest, but it tends to get all twisted and then you end up with a big knot. So what I find to be a lot easier is just to pull 1 strand at a time. So I'm just, in one hand, I'm going to hold my floss pretty loosely. I'm going to grab 1 strand and just begin pulling it. And you can see it's all bunching up here, but that's okay, because when I'm done, I can just lie it flat again, and then I would just go for the next one. So I'm going to pull 3 out and then line them up on top of each other. So then I'll end up having 2 strands of floss with 3 strands each. Next, I'm going to thread my needle. This needle on the right, this is an embroidery needle. The one on the left is a regular sharp needle, and you can see that the embroidery needle has a longer eye. So this makes it ideal for embroidery and a lot easier to get all our strands of floss through it. So let's go ahead and remove the sharp. I'm going to take one end of my floss and just put it through the eye. Now if you do have trouble threading a needle, you can use something called a needle threader, which is a tool that should make it a lot easier. Now it's time to tie a knot in our floss. So when we put our thread through our needle, we have a short tail and we have the long end of the floss. These 2 ends are not going to be brought together. You're always just going to have a tail on one side. The knot is going to be at the end of the long end. Some people make the mistake that they also want to tie a knot at the end of the tail because they think it's going to help prevent the floss from coming through the eye of the needle and they won't have to keep reflossing it. Don't do that, because what happens is when you're sewing and you pull your needle through your fabric, it's going to stop where the knot is on the tail, not down here. So you're not going to be able to get very far. If you do have a problem with the thread coming off the needle as you're sewing, what I recommend is when you're holding your needle and you're pulling it through, you're pinching right at the eye. So I'm holding it here as I'm sewing it, and then it's not going to come off. If instead you're holding your needle at a different point, then as you're pulling it through, it will come off the eye. So you're just going to make sure, pinch it down here, and that should stop that. So let's go ahead and tie the knot down here. Wrap the end of the floss around your index finger, so it's wrapped all the way around, and I'm pinching it between my index finger and my thumb. Now with my thumb, I'm going to roll it off my index finger, and you can see right here at the top where it's wrapped around the rest of my floss, I'm going to pinch that area at the top and I'm going to pull it. And there we have a knot. So I just pull this tail and that makes it a little bit tighter. Then I'm going to use my scissors and I'm going to cut it off. Just make sure that you don't cut it too close to the knot because it could undo itself and then you'll just have to do another knot. So leaving about 1/8 of an inch of a tail on the end there should be sufficient. And that's all it takes. When doing embroidery, you definitely want to use an embroidery hoop, and you can see I have one here. Now it comes in wood or plastic in different sizes, so you can pick whatever one that you're comfortable with. And you can see we have an inner hoop inside of a larger hoop. So I'm going to take the inner hoop section, I'm placing it under the side that I'm going to sew, And you're going to make sure your fabric is right side up like I have here. Now normally I like to place it somewhere in the middle of the design if I'm just starting it, but you can really place it wherever you need to. And then you're going to take the outer hoop and you're going to place it over that inner hoop, and you can see what it does. It makes the fabric nice and taut, and this is what we want to make it a lot easier for when we're sewing. We have this screw up here so we can adjust it, so you can make it bigger for when you're fitting it, and then once it's fit you can go ahead and tighten that up. Normally after I tighten it up and my fabric's here, I just pull at my fabric on the edge just to make it extra tight. Now you do have to be careful when you're handling your fabric. Make sure that your hands are nice and clean because we don't want to get any dirty marks. And even if your fabric has crease lines or wrinkles, I would not press this because the hot iron can set our ink, and we want to make sure that we can take it out when we're done. Alright, so we're ready to start sewing our first stitch. Now when you're ready to start your stitch, you're always going to start it off the same way. We're looking at the right side of the fabric, and I'm actually going to start right here, and I'm coming from underneath. So I'm coming up from the wrong side, bringing up my needle to the right side. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want my knot to be hidden on the back. We don't want to see our knots on the right side. Then after I come up, I'm going to go directly back down into my fabric, completing my first stitch. So you go up and then you go down. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to come up, and make sure that when you pull your thread through, and you can see here I'm pinching at the eye of my needle, you're going to pull slowly and smoothly because we want to make sure that we're not going to cause any knots. And then I'm going to go directly down, and you want to make sure that you're not pulling your stitches too tight, but you do want them to lie nice and flat on the fabric because we don't want them puckering up. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my next stitch, coming up and then going down. Now where beginners tend to have issues, they'll come up and then they'll bring it up again. So what happens is this thread is going over the embroidery loop and then coming up again, and obviously we don't want to do that. So whenever you come up, the next step is always to go back down again. Now we're going to talk about what you need to do when you're ready to tie a knot. So at this point, maybe you're ready to do a new type of stitch, your thread ran out, or you're ready to move on to another color. You definitely do want to tie a knot because you don't want to do all this work and then your stitches end up coming out. So first thing is we're going to be looking at the wrong side of our design. So this is the back of the design. And I always look at it occasionally anyways, just to make sure that I don't have any knots or rat nests going on with my thread. We always wanted to make sure that it is look somewhat orderly and nice and neat. So you can see here's my thread right here, and these are the stitches that I did previously. The last stitch that I did is actually this stitch right here. But I'm actually going to use the next closest thread or stitch, which is this one right here, because this one is somewhat loose. Since it was my last stitch, if I pull this, you'll see that it tightens up. So I'm not going to do my knot on that stitch, but I'll just find the next closest one. So then it'll be a little bit more secure. So you can see I'm going underneath those stitches, and I'm not actually going through the fabric because we don't want this to appear on the right side of our design. So I'm just going through the actual stitches, and just go ahead and pull it all the way through. And then I'm going to do it again, coming from the same side that I did before, just to anchor it. Now what happens is we actually create a loop here with our thread, and then I'm going to go through that loop with my needle. And that's going to create a knot when we pull this tight. And there you go. So there's a knot, and I just like to do it twice because I happen to be paranoid and I want to really make sure that it's not going to come out. So I just go underneath those stitches, I create a loop, and then I go through my loop and I pull it tight, and then that creates a knot. And then you can go ahead and trim it off. Just make sure that you don't cut too close to your knot, because again we want to make sure that's not going to come undone. So there you go. Please make sure to check out other tutorials on hand embroidery stitches from Jack Dempsey Needle Art.